This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest, the host of the Silver Screeners podcast and the co-host of Movies Across the Pod series. It's Frank Mandosa.
I think I get the exact same level of applause every time I walk into my classroom.
If only we could all get that applause to follow us everywhere.
It's great
Frank,
to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you're very welcome. We're glad to have you. So, Frank, I don't know if you've listened to any of our new guest episodes over the last few weeks, but with all new guests to the show, we like to ask three very basic questions. Well, we think they're basic. I know everybody kind of recoils, at least at the second one, but a few basic questions to allow the audience to get to know you. Just first one up, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
Well, I am a high school English and film teacher. I've been podcasting now for about 3 years. And as far as my passion for movies goes, I owe it all to my grandmother. When I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I can recall that she would come over and babysit us every time my parents would have what we today call a date night. And she would always turn on the 8 o'clock movie on television, you know, back in the day when they would show movie reruns on TV stations. And I can still remember that the very first black and white film that I ever got a glimpse of was Annie Oakley. And I remember Annie Oakley, I was familiar with the name, I think probably from a storybook in school or something along those lines. So I was thinking, that's Annie Oakley? No, it's a movie. And so that's when I first got wind of, you know, the fact that people actually get paid to to act in front of a camera.
Yeah.
So I owe my movie passion all to her.
That's wonderful. Generational passing of torches on movies. We somewhat know something about that, right, Pop?
Yes, we do.
All right. Everyone's least favorite question. What is your favorite movie and why?
So I was preparing for that question. I probably could not even narrow it down to 25, but for the sake of brevity, what I did was I just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo among my absolute favorites, and I landed on Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino, and Chris Sarandon, John Cazale.
You've got the poster behind you there, so that's good.
Poster behind me, and it's
synergy.
Just exactly. It's 1975. It's Pacino in his prime. It's John Cazale, who is probably either forgotten or not known by a lot of contemporary movie audiences. This guy was he left us too soon. So the acting, the writing, I love the energy of the film because it's pat crime thriller, it's pat satire, it's pat expose on the power of the media. I could go on, but I won't.
No, John Cazale has been mentioned on this program a bunch of times. Probably one of the great filmographies of all times because I think all 6 of his movies are absolute bangers. What is it? Godfather, Godfather 2, Dog Day, The Conversation, and The Deer Hunter. I think those are like the 6. There's one more
and they
that
were
might
all
be
nominated for Best Picture.
Yep. Well, and several of them won. So, I mean, there's that. But lastly, what makes a good movie for you?
It has to be a good story. Now, I admit shamefully, well, maybe not shamefully, but I admit with a certain degree of self-consciousness that I'm a sucker for sometimes a nice cheaply made film. If we're talking a cheap horror sequel, for example, yeah, I like brain candy just as much as the next guy. But when it comes to a movie that I really want to get something out of, it has to be a really good story. It has to be compelling characters. It's got to be good writing.
There are very few things better than having a good story, and I think that's why we all crowd around movies as much as we have for years. So I'm completely with you right there. But for tonight, let's move into our movie. For our 222nd episode, we discuss one of the most shocking twists in film history. celebrating its 25th anniversary with The Sixth Sense, directed and written by M. Night Shyamalan. Music by James Newton Howard, starring Bruce Willis as Malcolm Crowe, Haley Joel Osment as Cole Sear, Toni Collette as Lynn Sear, Olivia Williams as Anna Crowe, Donnie Wahlberg, who I did not recognize until I read the credits afterwards, as Vincent Gray, Glenn Fitzgerald as Sean, Misha Barton as Kira Collins, Trevor Morgan as Tommy Tomasimo, I hope I got that right, and Bruce Norris as Mr. Stanley Cunningham. Recognition for this movie, The Sixth Sense, was released on August 2nd, 1999. On a budget of $40 million, the film would be a global sensation and grossing $672.8 million at the box office and finishing far and away the number 2 film of 1999, both domestically and internationally. Did either of you look up who was number 1?
No.
No, I didn't.
It's a franchise film that most people try and forget that it even exists. It would be Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
As soon as you said try to forget exists, right away, there it was.
Ah, Jar Jar Binks. Misa not think that's so good. The film was generally well received by critics, and it would go on to receive 6 Oscar nominations for Best Picture, Director for Shyamalan, Supporting Actor for Osment, Supporting Actors for Collette, Original Screenplay for Shyamalan, and Film Editing. After a 6-month online promotional campaign, The Sixth Sense was released on VHS and DVD by Hollywood Pictures Home Video on March 28, 2000. It went on to become the top-selling DVD of 2000, with more than 2.5 million units shipped, and the all-time second-best DVD up until that point, as well as the top video rental title of all time. The film generated at least $173 million, equivalent to about $307 million in today's terms, from the U.S. home video market, including $125.8 million, equivalent to roughly about $223 million now, in VHS rentals in the U.S. alone. In the UK, it was the third most watched film on television in 2003, with 9 million viewers that year. Since its release, The Sixth Sense has also received numerous accolades, including, in 2013, the Writers Guild of America ranking it the number 50 screenplay on its list of 101 greatest screenplays ever written. The AFI has also ranked it on the following lists: AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills at number 60, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes with I See Dead People at number 44, and AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition at number 89, where it was actually the most recent film to appear on that list at the time. The Sixth Sense currently holds an 86% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 64 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
None. This is the first time I'd seen it. I just never got around to seeing it.
So as with all 90s films, I have to ask, is it because you're blaming it once again on having children?
Well, this is not the film that you necessarily put on with small children. And getting out was not always the easiest thing.
Frank, what's your relationship to the film?
This is going to sound really strange, and I know it. But this film came out in the summer of 99, and I had just gotten engaged. So it reminds me of that period of time when my wife and I were engaged. We had gone to go see it together. I can remember us talking about it a lot together afterwards. We both thought it was really well written, really well acted. So it kind of reminds me of the early days of our, of that phase of our relationship.
So do you have fond memories then of this period?
I realize this is making me sound really sick and twisted, but yeah, no, I do have fond memories I definitely have fond memories of the period. And the movie itself, I do have a lot of respect for it, in the sense that in a summer of The Phantom Menace and, a lot of other, The Mummy and a lot of other, I don't want to say brainless, but, popcorn flicks. In a summer of popcorn flicks, it was nice to have something that required a little bit more thought, something you could actually decompress and talk about afterwards and have differing opinions on. And so that's my relationship to it. Is I think that I'm not sure if it was his film debut, M. Night Shyamalan, but I think it was at least his theatrical debut, the feature-length theatrical debut. I think it was he hit the ground running with this one.
Yeah, he was definitely not real known before this. I don't know if it is his film debut, but it's definitely the one that put him on the map. And I think that has a profound effect on where we're going to come down with some of the scores later. Obviously, for spurring him along and being one of the more recognizable directors. Like, it's hard not to know an M. Night Shyamalan film based on, the twist that you always think is coming at the end, kind of subverting the audience in a lot of different ways, and just a stylistic aesthetic, I think, that he brings that's kind of unique to himself. I will say I was 9 when this movie came out. I knew things about the movie, but I didn't see it until probably about 2011. My real relationship to the movie was through other things in pop culture. So I was a big Scrubs fan back in the mid-2000s. There's a whole episode that has an arc on revealing the spoiler for this movie in it, like 6 years after the fact. But you couldn't escape in the early 2000s, I See Dead People. You couldn't escape that this movie was gigantic, and there were kids who knew everything about it, and the twist was everywhere. People were talking about it. It just had a underground swell in a way that you really don't see anymore for movies when they come out. It's more TV shows where people will like catch up after the fact, and you get like a small audience at first, and it just keeps steadily building until it becomes this bigger thing. We just don't really have this in the way that we did in the 90s with movies.
If I could ask both of you saw it after the fact. Did you know the twist ending when you saw it for the first time?
Yes.
You both did know the twist ending. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been about 12-ish years, 13 years since I've seen it the last time. I knew the twist, and so I was kind of really looking for it this time. Whereas the first time I saw it, I just kind of casually watched it. But now that I'm watching it more professionally for the show, I looked at it very differently. And so you notice all of the things that are there in setting it up, that his wife never actually responds to him. Nobody actually like touches him except like Cole at one very small point in the film. There are just little cues all over the place that I remember people talking about this movie that are obvious once you have that revealed to you. But I still thought that there were very surprising moments that I completely forgot about this film. One of them being the Misha Barton scene with the tape. I completely forgot that thing was even in there. And there are still just good things in the movie, even though the twist gets so much press.
No, I mean, I knew about it, and I guess to some extent that may have been one of the reasons why I didn't watch it, because I kind of had it told to me once, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I don't really need to watch it now. But actually, now in retrospect, I wish I would have watched it earlier.
So what is the film about?
Ultimately, there are things that people mean to say that are left unsaid. And in this way, it's almost the ghosts are haunting themselves about things that were unresolved in their lives with people who mattered to them. And they have this yearning to speak even though they can't.
There's a big separation, I think, in this film between things that it represents, so the story versus the actual plot. Most people will tell you the plot. The story, though, and I would agree with you, is a lot about grief. And specifically the grief either we leave with people or that we have from people who have passed on. And for me, that's the haunting aspect of this film. Whether you say that, these ghosts are in like some form of a purgatory trying to resolve the issues before they can move on with their eternity, or, however religious you are. And the movie is clearly not, but that aspect, do you have resolution? Do you have a form of grief laid out for you that you can actually find peace? I think that, to me, more than anything, is what this movie is about.
To me, it's a movie about the power of fear and the power of love. I think particularly of the story element where Bruce Willis he tells Cole, talk to them. Talk to them, and that erased Cole's fear pretty much. Might have been too simplistic of a depiction of how all of a sudden talking with ghosts was great. But that fear being eradicated, that allowed Cole to finally open up to his mother. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse and talk about Indelible or best scenes, but when he tells his mother at the end, when he shares a secret with her that he sees dead people, it's the love between the two of them that really, to me, carries the whole film. And I don't know, I did see not necessarily religion, but faith in the film. There was you had a lot of close-ups of religious iconography, scenes inside the church, close-ups of the statues. I'm not saying that it was necessarily a religion-pushing film, but I would say more on the broad sweeping strokes, the idea of faith. Faith in that we do go on, that there is an existence out there for us beyond this mortal life, and because it's in human nature to fear the unknown, that's where the theme, to me at least, of the theme of the power of fear comes into play.
No, I would agree with the faith notion of this. You are very correct that there are tons of religious iconography, and we're talking about he's introduced or these two meet in a church. I mean, from that point, it's kind of our jumping off point for the rest of this, but it's made for an American audience, which as a Western culture is somewhat grounded in a lot of our Western canon of stories and mythology is based in Judeo-Christianism. Or Judeo-Christianity. So some of these things are maybe not shared to push, but rather to point to something that feels familiar so that you can follow along the rest of the story. But that makes it no less poignant. It's just the avenue by which these things are introduced to us so that we get the point he's trying to make. And I still think I mentioned the scene where he reveals himself to his mother or shares with her. I think that scene alone is the skeleton key that unlocks the entire film for me.
Absolutely. That was the coming full circle for both of them, I think.
So we've had robust discussions on this show before about what is or is not a horror film. Do you consider this a horror film?
I consider it a thriller, but I would add that I consider it a hybrid of thriller, human drama, and a little bit of horror. You do have the scare factor thrown in. You have the jump scares and the scenes where we're obviously meant to feel fear above all else. I mean, I think particularly of when little Cole is going to the bathroom and we see that figure in the bathrobe just walk from right to left, and you have that dramatic musical dung. That moment alone, I can remember seeing, because I saw this twice in the theaters, and the second time I saw it with my sister, my younger sister, and I just remember her grabbing, we're talking bruises on the upper arm, and I can remember her saying after the movie got out that it's the unknown that scares the hell out of her the most. So I think in that sense, yeah, the movie does appeal to shared human fears. But I wouldn't call it a straight up horror film, no. I would not put this in the same category. As a veteran of several video stores in my day of being an employee, I would not put it in the same category as, for example, The Shining or The Conjuring or Insidious or a lot of those other supernatural horror films. As great as many of those films are, I would put this really, I think it's in a category all by itself, because it just has so many pieces of all of these different genres, just with the perfect combination. And it was capturing lightning in a bottle. And I think that Shyamalan has been trying to recapture that lightning in the years since, and various degrees of success.
Certainly. I don't know. Maybe this is me softening on the position that I've taken earlier as to what is or is not a horror film. I think that maybe the disservice that's pushed on by a lot of the grotesque and um, slasher type horror films that we're more familiar with, which we put in a certain box and think those are what horror films are, does a disservice to any of the ones that I think are actually a little bit more well made, such as I think this film, Jaws. We had a very robust discussion back in season 2 on whether that's a horror film. The Silence of the Lambs is somewhat loosely considered in that same vein. And I think The Shining could possibly fit into this box as well, because there's not a lot of like jump scares. That's just more of a creepiness, what was the word I used on that particular pod? An eeriness that kind of fills the response or that scene. There's really only two that I think are really true scary moments in The Shining. And likewise with this film, I think there are a couple of moments, like when he's locked in the cabinet and you're not sure what's going on with some of that, or when certain ghosts show up, like, let me show you where my dad keeps his guns, and he turns around and he's got no back of his head. There are moments like that. Misha Barton appearing for the first time and then just like throwing up all over herself. That's eerie. I think this is somewhat of a horror film, but it's in the category of it's a little bit more about other things than just trying to scare you.
Horror can be a whole variety of things, but ultimately it is a vehicle by which there's a level of anxiety that builds with periodic points where there's startle as the point of release. The difference between comedy and horror is not that far apart. There's a build. The anxiety is different, but it's looking for triggers for the release of the emotion or of the underlying tension. And so, yeah, I think this is a horror movie in that regard, because you feel you're constantly wondering what's going to happen next, and the anticipation is building, and then things happen, and boom, all of a sudden you're startled, and there's a sudden release of that anxiety, that tension, and then it starts to build again.
The film deserves a lot of credit for allowing there to be a shared experience among the audience members, because no matter what a person's experience may be, for example, if they're a believer, if they're not a believer, if they, if they have any notions of what death entails and how that can differ from person to person, despite all of these different viewpoints that exist and all of these different personal experiences that result in the way that we tend to approach the idea of our own mortality, it is still a shared, a fundamental shared human emotion that the film strikes a raw nerve with. And I think it's a nerve that I would say most of us have, just in terms of why do we exist? How long do we exist for? Is there a permanence? Is this temporary? And I think that any form of that, whether it's a film, whether it's a song, whatever it may be, if it provokes that kind of thought so that people can share ideas and discuss, to me, that's a success right there. That's a win.
And on those same lines, I mean, we've talked a lot about how this movie became an overnight success. I mean, you look at the box office for 1999, by most accounts, one of the big film years of all time. But there was such a gap between 1 and 2, and then everything else even that year. I think The Matrix was like number 4 that year, and it grossed less than this movie. It caught and tapped into something. Is it the nature that this story is somewhat universal in its themes, that it got such a reaction from an audience, or is it something else?
I think that whatever your identity is, there's something in the movie that you can relate to. Again, if you're a believer, if you're not a believer, if you're a parent, if you're a little kid, well, maybe not that little seeing a movie, but if you are a person who has never been believed whenever you reveal some truth about yourself, if people say, I don't believe you, you're a freak, they keep calling him a freak, you're just looking for attention. I think that there are a lot of roles that the different characters play. If you're in a marriage and you feel that you have been placed second to your spouse's work, as she comes right out and she says to Bruce Willis in the very first scene, she's reading the citation and she says, "This is the mayor of Philadelphia saying to you, job well done for all the work that you have done over the years that has resulted in everything else in your life, including me, coming second." I think that there's just something that can speak to really just about anybody of a certain age.
Ultimately, I think that this film kind of really tapped into really a period of that summer where there wasn't a lot of thought-provoking movies going on. To me, one thing I've learned is no matter how much advertising you do, it never is as good as word of mouth, which is why I think social media influencers have grown in popularity so much, because they can do more in 30 seconds than 40 hours of advertising does. Because there's a trust that you have in them. And so I think that's part of what made this big. The other thing, and as far as the DVD sales, the DVD was released, when was that, Tom, again?
So it was about 6 months after it was originally released.
So again, I mean, we were going through this whole period, the millennium, we were going to have the Y2K crash and all this. And I think there was a certain nostalgia for human connection built. Of course, we've been through a couple of times since then where human connection has become much more emphasized, both 9/11 and the pandemic. But I think even at that time, we were coming out of this period of the 80s and early 90s where it was me, make money, be rich, I'm going to do this, and if you stand in my way, then forget it. I don't need you. I think it came back to people wanting to realize that they needed people in their lives, and they needed to have relationships more than their own self-aggrandizement.
I think I'm going to make it even simpler than that. You're trying to look at these like overarching cultural themes that are there and trying to grasp something out of the 80s for 1999 while you can do it. I think it's a little bit far away, so you're having to pull a little bit harder on the threads. To me, the word of mouth that you mentioned is strong for this because of the twist ending. It is universally known as one of like these seminal examples, along with like The Usual Suspects. Those are like the two that everybody mentions as being the twist at the end of a movie. I think they somewhat forget that at the time that it originally came out, the biggest and actual, I would say, is the biggest twist ending to any film is Empire Strikes Back, Luke, I am your father. But we'll digress into that next year. The point being that you had this big moment. You had a bunch of people passing along that this movie was surprising in a way that other films weren't at the time. This felt new. It felt fresh from a different filmmaker that they hadn't seen. We had a new rise in horror out of the late 90s that I think was about to start taking off. And as such, you had this campaign behind it where it was just kind of an underground thing. And the movie's good. So you get a good movie with a good push behind it and get this kind of an unusual organic campaign, and it becomes something more. It's kind of how last year the Barbenheimer thing just kind of took off because everybody wanted to be a part of it. It had this organic swell online, and we haven't seen anything really since. We've had things that are, peaking close to it. You know, Twisters will have a couple million, and Inside Out will do ridiculously well, but okay, Fall Guy and Challengers and some of these other movies, they kind of flop by the traditional metrics. So I don't know. It's hard to measure some of these things. To me, it's just this had the right moment at the right time with people that were wanting something new. And we get that a lot in the nines of a particular decade.
Well, if I could ever figure out what people really want, I could have retired a long time ago.
You could retire now.
I suppose
You
I
just
could.
say you don't want to.
I suppose I could.
I mean, you can't draw early retirement, but you could sell out. You could go do something else. You could walk away. No one's stopping you. And I say this as one of your employees.
Yeah, okay.
I think something else that has to be remembered, if we're talking about The Sixth Sense being a film that benefited from coming out at the right time for it to have the greatest cultural impact, it really should be remembered that it came out within a week. Like this, I think there was maybe 1 week separating the two of them, two at the most. The Blair Witch Project. The summer of '99 was a summer. Once you had your fill of the visual effects extravaganzas of The Matrix and of Phantom Menace, in theaters, Fight Club was not a hit, although it's become a huge film in the years since. In theaters, Summer of Sam was not a big hit, but it's had a following in the years since. Blair Witch Project and Sixth Sense really dominated the box office in the summer of '99. I remember that clear as day. And I think the fact that both of them were not only were both of them seen as horror films, but they were also supernatural themed. So I think that each of them benefited from feeding off of the other's popularity. Once you see one, you have to see the other. Kind of like what you were saying, kind of like the Barbenheimer thing. If you really want to be part of Barbenheimer, you have to see Barbie, you have to see Oppenheimer, you have to see both in the theaters. And I think that Sixth Sense and Blair Witch for the summer of '99, it was sort of an early version of what Barbenheimer eventually became.
And I would say there are only like 3 really original projects of that year that are in the top 10. Blair Witch is one, Sixth Sense is another, The Matrix is the other one. Otherwise, you have basically what I would say is retread or recycled IP animation type of stuff. So Star Wars Episode 1, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, Toy Story 2, Tarzan, which is just Disney's latest animated classic that they're going to throw out every summer, right around my sister's birthday in June, which we all went to see, of course. Big Daddy, which is just, okay, this is the next Adam Sandler movie. The Mummy, which is franchise IP, but it's, horror associated. Runaway Bride, which was just an opportunity for Richard Gere and Julia Roberts to get back together. So it's like, okay, let's throw them in another romantic comedy and see how this does. Other than that, there's just not a lot here that you could say is like truly original except those 3 movies. So, Dad, do you want to dig more into this film? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. The Sixth Sense is a haunting psychological thriller that unfolds with masterful precision under the direction of M. Night Shyamalan. Bruce Willis stars as Dr. Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist grappling with his own personal demons after a violent encounter with a former patient. He finds a chance for redemption in young Cole Sear, played with an eerie intensity by Haley Joel Osment. Cole is a troubled boy who harbors a chilling secret. He sees dead people. As Dr. Crowe delves deeper into Cole's world, the film weaves an intricate tapestry of suspense and revelation. Shyamalan's meticulous storytelling and James Newton Howard's evocative score creates an atmosphere thick with dread and poignancy. The Sixth Sense is not just a ghost story, it's a profound meditation on grief, communication, and the unseen connections that bind us. The film's climax delivers one of the most unforgettable twists in cinematic history, leaving audiences reeling and re-examining everything they thought they knew.
Thank you. Did you know? David Vogel, then president of production of Walt Disney Studios, read M. Night Shyamalan's spec script and instantly loved it. Without obtaining corporate approval, Vogel bought the rights to the script despite the high price of $3 million and the stipulation that Shyamalan could direct the film. Did you know? Reportedly, Haley Joel Osment got the role of Cole Sear for one of three reasons. First, he was the best for it. Second, he was the only boy at auditions who wore a tie. And third, director M. Night Shyamalan was surprised when he asked Osment if he read his part. Osment replied, "I read it 3 times last night." Shyamalan was impressed, saying, "Wow, you read your part 3 times?" To which Osment replied, "No, I read the script 3 times." Did you know? This movie was filmed in sequence. Did you know? This was the first of 2 movies that Bruce Willis owed Disney after he caused another production, The Broadway Brawler, to be shut down due to him firing the director. He also was paid $10 million, half of his usual salary at the time. Did you know? M. Night Shyamalan originally pitched the film as a cross between The Exorcist from 1973 and Ordinary People from 1980. And with that, we will take our first break and we will be right back.
Okay.
Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 223rd episode, we welcome back celebrity guest Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac podcast and our newest celebrity guest, Sean Phillips of Math Teacher Movies, to rediscuss one of the most controversial Oscar exclusions of all time, Do the Right Thing from 1989. Written and directed by Spike Lee, music by Bill Lee, starring Spike Lee, Rosie Perez, Danny Aiello, Ossie Davis, Giancarlo Esposito, and John Turturro. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Now, before we get back into things, I just want to ask our guest, kind of what do you have going on there over at Silver Screeners and across the movie pods? Or movies across the pod, my bad. I don't want to get your series wrong.
Well, in Silver Screeners right now, I am about to begin recording a sort of a 3-episode series of actors who are known primarily for one type of performance, and they try something new. So Steve Carell, for example, trying his hand at drama, or someone known primarily for drama trying their hand at comedy. So that's going to be sort of a 3-episode series. I already have one recorded, and it's just a matter of pulling the other 2 together. My most recent episode was on 1934's It Happened One Night and 2009's The Proposal with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds. As far as movies across the pod goes, next episode that we have planned, my co-host Dave and I, he's out in Liverpool, England, we are going to be recording An American Werewolf in London. One of my personal favorites.
Well, I know we covered It Happened One Night earlier this year for its, now I have to do the calculation in my head, 90th anniversary. I think that was in March.
Yes.
90, yeah.
Yeah. So, wow. But great. And again, glad to have you on. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about that at the end of the show here again. But also before we move on, unfortunately, you guys out in the audience, I don't mean to scold you, but you're falling behind. It's been weeks, probably a month since we've received any Ask Dana Anything questions. And I have to express my disappointment. So apparently you guys aren't interested in my co-host anymore, because this is some of our best content, is when we ask him stuff off the cuff that he has absolutely no preparation for, and he comes up with some unusual story of some court-related thing. But anyway, if you want to redeem yourselves out there in the ether, please write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us at any of our socials at gmotepodcast on Instagram, Letterboxd, TikTok, and X. That sounds right.
Yes.
Anyway.
Unless Frank had a question.
Yes, unless our guest has a redeeming question for the audience on the Ask Dana Anything.
I do have a question, actually.
Okay.
There you go.
It's irrelevant to The Sixth Sense, but is there any movie that you can think of that is an honest and realistic portrayal of a courtroom scene?
Yes. My Cousin Vinny.
You're gonna really bring up you and the
Yes.
Vinny Gambini.
Honest to God. Every time I have watched that, it is the most realistic method of cross-examination and presentation of evidence I've seen in a courtroom. In fact, I know for a fact it's taught in some law schools. They show you that film as a method of cross-examination. And
Really?
yes. And in fact, when I did trial work a lot of times, which predated My Cousin Vinny, I started doing it it's about 1990, I think, is when I had my first major trial stuff. But I decided to create a persona, somebody that was more likable or realistic with the jury. But the bigger the jerk the prosecutor was, the more homespun and simple and aw shucks I became. And so it's part of the whole persona is to cross-examine and to do it in a way that builds. And the parts where he goes, "Are you telling me that you cook grits faster than any other place or on your stove any faster than any other place on the face of the earth?" And I mean, I've done stuff like that, and it's fun. And if you can get the jury chuckling because the witness who's supposed to be key for the prosecution looks like a buffoon, you've got the jury in your hands. I mean, I had a case where it was a confession, and she wanted her trial. And I asked the deputy sheriff, I said, "Well, I noticed the handwriting here. It's not real clear. Did she write this out?" He goes, "No, I wrote it out." "So how did you write it out?" He goes, "Well, she told me what to say and I wrote it down." I said, "And then you showed it to her?" "Yes." "Did you have her sign it?" "Yes." I said, "Did you ever ask her to proofread it and see if it's accurate?" "No." "You mean it could be wrong?" "Maybe." I mean, right there, I'm like, wow, okay, yeah. Okay. So, but yes, it's My Cousin Vinny. I thought about this a lot. You know, I've seen The Verdict. I've seen a lot of courtroom. And oh my God, if you watch Presumed Innocent, either the movie or now the TV show that's on, is it on Apple, I believe?
Yeah, Apple TV.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to scream into the night about, I mean, just the level of it being so legally incompetent.
Crime is interesting, law is not.
But it can be if you do it and present it in a very playful, interesting way.
Okay. Then I would also point to what I think is possibly the better example of Anatomy of a Murder, which we'll be discussing here in a couple of months.
The problem with Anatomy of a Murder is it's presented in a very dry way. I know it's a homicide and you don't want to be too comical, but juries are used to, especially now, are used to television. And so they want to be entertained.
Again, I think you're forgetting way too much about that film because it's definitely playful and James Stewart is engrossing. But okay, that's just me.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you for the question, Frank. We appreciate it.
Yes.
Let's move to best performance. I believe that's where we left off. Dad, who do you have down?
I have M. Night Shyamalan. Much for two parts. One is the script, which I think is phenomenal. And then the pacing of the film itself. There wasn't a slow spot in the film, I felt.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's the totality of the work, from the direction and creating the aesthetic that he's now known for, the twist that comes at the end of the movie, and the visual style to set all of that up. Because if you get the audience too many clues, I mean, these are very, very subtle clues, but not enough to pick up, then the twist doesn't pay off. And then finally, I agree with some of the pacing and the overall, but it's hard to argue with anybody who finally has their feature film kind of debut, and they get their vision finally on screen, not being the best performance, especially in at least one that we're talking about as a potential great movie of all time.
For me, the cinematography of Tak Fujimoto was, in its subtlety, just as powerful, just as potent as the script was. I think particularly of the scene where Cole and Malcolm meet for the first time. Not for the first time, but when Malcolm comes to Cole's home for their first session, and he plays the game of take a step forward, take a step back. The way that the camera, it's just so underplayed, which is brilliant. It wasn't ostentatious. All those point of view shots of the camera moving closer to Bruce Willis, stepping away from Bruce Willis, you became Cole. And that's just one example of many that I can point out in the film of how that is truly one of the unsung heroes in terms of what gave the film its overall effectiveness.
Yeah, the framing and the blocking in this, I think, are somewhat underheralded, but it really does contribute to the secrecy of the twist as well. But I agree with you. Taking a choice where he's only representing the feet on that scene is a definite choice. You could have pictured the whole kid, and so then you're just kind of more buying in on him. But by doing it on the feet, I think it actually gave it a little more of an interesting, okay, why are we only focusing on his feet? You know, we're not looking for facial expressions. We're using a very simple movement. There are a couple of spots where I was taken out of the movie by some of the like gorilla movements, but I still think even those were intentional. One of the few times, like when they're going up the staircase when he's screaming in the closet, that's kind of a gorilla movement and a panic set, and I think that's actually a very good use of kind of a shaky cam aspect. So there is a lot of good filming, but then I also still bring it back around. How much is that the DP, and how much of that is Shyamalan himself kind of realizing his visual cue and identity in making the film? Best secondary performance, I have Haley Joel Osment. I have to admit, as much as we've occasionally criticized child actors on this particular program, this is a top 10 child performance in film for me. He is excellent in this film. Some of his stuff is a lot more cheeky as an adult because I don't think he can escape the shadow of what this was, but there's a reason he's nominated and Bruce Willis is not. Not that Bruce Willis is bad in the movie, but the kid is the linchpin of what's happening in the film. And he is just as much. I think he could have been nominated for Best Actor, personally. I think they probably put it in Best Supporting so that he had a little bit better shot at it. But even so, wow. For somebody that's, I want to say he was like 10, 11, 12 when he made this. It's just like an incredible performance for me.
I would certainly say Haley Joel Osment as well. Not too many children historically have been nominated for Oscars. You have maybe one every 10 years. I think the last child performance, and I could be wrong, but I think the last one was Stanley Wallace for Beast of the Southern Wild. Before that, we had...
It was Jacob, I can't remember his last name, but for Room, alongside Brie Larson. That was just slightly after that movie.
Oh, yeah, he was not nominated for an Oscar, which he should have been.
Was he not? Wow.
He was not nominated for an Oscar.
I'm gonna look it up. I'll look it up just to make sure. Because if he wasn't, he really should have been for that. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think about Stanley Wallace for Beast of the Southern Wild, Hallie Steinfeld for True Grit. Going way back, you have Tatum O'Neal, you have Linda Blair, Mary Badham for To Kill a Mockingbird, Patty Duke for The Miracle Worker, Justin Henry for Kramer vs. Kramer. All of these child performances, they were nominated for reasons, because they were standouts.
Yeah.
Haley Joel Osment, the fact that he did not receive the Oscar, with all due respect to Michael Caine, that was an Oscar that was given for, okay, here's a career cap or Oscar for you. for Michael Caine. Haley Joel Osment, I mean, that was the true definition of robbery.
You are right. He was not nominated, and I can't believe it because I swear he was. Oh well. Anyway,
Well, I'll make it unanimous. So I will also go with Haley Joel Osment. I quite frankly cannot believe a child actor played that part with such restraint. It would have been easy for any actor to have made it almost cartoonish, but he played that part with such utter underperformance to make it both believable and eerie throughout. Always realizing there's more to what's going on than he's sharing or that you can see or understand. And him holding that secret in without conveying it through any of his actions or words. I thought it was just a phenomenal performance.
yeah, that was the part that really stuck out to me is that he's holding on to all of this stuff, and there's such a strength to his character that I don't know if we appreciate necessarily the first time that you see the film. But the other part that strikes me is just the softness that he has in a lot of these interactions, both with Malcolm and then eventually with the ghosts themselves. He has a kind of soft vulnerability to him to allow him to be the vehicle that is like their communication between the spiritual world and our own, or in actual reality. And I think that's what to me makes the skeleton key scene that we talked about earlier so impactful, is that he has this softness. You know, as many times as his mom has kind of got on him, and we get the bumblebee pendant and, you know, all of these other things that go on, it's his caringness that I think overwhelmingly brings us back to him, what draws us in as a very charismatic figure. And if we don't have that with him, if he's even just kind of blasé, I don't think we invest in this story in the way that we do. So to me, it's much more important that they got that casting right than they did with Bruce Willis. Because I, to be fair, it's not that Bruce Willis did anything wrong. I mean, he's just fine in this role. But I think you could have recast that with a lot of different people. Like Tom Hanks could have been Malcolm Crowe. Like there's a handful of different actors that could have easily been Malcolm Crowe at the time. Richard Gere could have been Malcolm Crowe.
He was too busy chasing after Julia Roberts.
Fair, but
and
like,
Runaway Bride.
I think it's a bigger possibility of all the people that couldn't have played Malcolm Crowe. Basically, eliminate any minorities because you weren't going to let them lead this film with a minority director already leading it, and then basically anybody that just simply doesn't fit. Like Keanu Reeves was not going to be playing Malcolm Crowe. Like he's much better fit to do The Matrix, but you get, I don't know, Michael Keaton could have played Malcolm Crowe. We've now thrown out like 5 or 6 different actors, and it's about the same character.
Yeah, I can see that.
Let's move to most charismatic. Dad, who do you have?
I have Toni Collette. From her opening scene through the entire film, I just thought that she really kind of filled the screen. I don't remember having seen her on anything else before. I had to look her up and find out that she was an Australian actress. But I just thought she really had a level of charm and movie star quality that filled that part out.
I also have Toni Collette because she is, in my personal opinion, probably one of the most underrated and underappreciated actresses, both 25 years ago and today. She did get the Oscar nomination for this, and I just think it's easy to forget just how much she transformed herself into this working class mom from Philadelphia. You know, like you said, she's Australian. She donned a wig for this film. She perfected the Philadelphia accent. she embodied the essence of this woman who wanted nothing more than just to connect with her son. And I don't know if she has any children in real life or not, but if she doesn't, then that just speaks to her strong capabilities as an actress to be able to put herself in the shoes of this fictional character. She was nominated. That was the year that it went to Angelina Jolie for Girl Interrupted, which was not a surprise. But the fact that she has not been nominated since, take a look at her filmography. She has done Knives Out. She has done Hereditary. She just has not, in terms of Hollywood recognition, she has not reached the heights of The Sixth Sense since The Sixth Sense. And I just think that's a crying shame. But she's just phenomenal in this film.
I'll go 3 for 3, and Dad, unfortunately, that means that we've agreed on all of these categories so far. How unusual for us. But I think that she balances really well in this movie the fear of what's going on with my child with the endearing love. I mean, you can see it in kind of the scene I mentioned before when we have the bumblebee pendant, but then he comes to her after the fact, "Are you still real mad at me? Look at my face." I mean, the two moments where they have polar opposites, but she's able to play it capably without losing the audience because she's being kind of a shrew. Like, the way that this mother role could have gone could have been much more Harpy-esque and much more demanding. Things have gone missing. Things are terribly weird. You're making it up. But she balances it out with a fond affection, caring fondness for the child that I don't think is universal in parents, but was necessary in this role for us to continue to care about that relationship. And again, by the time we get to that moment near the end with the two of them in the car, that's such a momentous moment in the film for me. If she doesn't balance this just so carefully, and maybe part of that has to do with direction as well, I think we lose the audience, and the impact of those last couple of scenes just isn't as big for me. So I have to give it to her because of being kind of a mother you almost wish you had. Let's go to best scene then. I have 5 nominees right now, and we can add more as needed. But first I have Break In. So obviously the opening salvo with Donnie
Vincent
Wahlberg.
Gray.
I was trying to go for the actor name, and I was forgetting because it's still, I did not recognize that as Donnie Wahlberg. Then I have Locked in the Closet. Then we skip forward quite a bit to the tape. So I hope you know what I mean by the tape being the dad watching the daughter be poisoned. Then I have Cole telling his mom, the scene we've mentioned many, many, many times. And then finally Letting Go, which is the final reveal and Bruce Willis having the conversation with his wife while she's sleeping. So are there any ones that I skipped over? And I know there are several entries that could be in here because there's a lot of different scenes, but any ones that I skipped over that you think should be included?
If we're going in terms of best scene, my understanding of that is that it's a scene that has the most emotional impact in the film, or that's the most, that leaves the biggest impression.
I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. I think for me personally, the best scene that I have is the one we've talked about endlessly so far. But you could nominate several other things that you just felt were still very impactful, that or at least worthy of a nomination.
For me, one of the most impactful scenes is a brief scene, contains absolutely no dialogue, and on the surface, it would appear not to add much to the plot at all and could have easily been a deleted scene. It's when Cole is sitting in the shopping cart and she's pushing the cart and they're outside of the supermarket and she's slowly pushing him, and then she decides, spur of the moment, that she's just going to race him. And he looks back and he joins in. He lifts his arms up in the air in victory. And they reach their car, and then they just turn around. He turns around. He looks at her. She looks at him with a smile on her face. And for a brief moment, they had a moment. there was a moment of connection between them. And I am so impressed and so glad that they didn't try to put more salt in the soup by adding some dialogue. I'm glad that they just knew sometimes less is more, and the scene did not need any dialogue at all. Because to me, it just reinforced the fact that this is a mother and a son who love each other, who really do have a strong connection. And once he is ready to reveal his secret, then their bond will be tighter than ever.
So out of break-in at the supermarket, locked in the closet, the tape, Cole tells his mom, and letting go, Dad, what is your best scene?
Cole tells his mom. Because it so defines the movie and what the movie, to me, says and what it's about, which is that whole unresolved thing. I mean, how many times have you been in your life where you feel like you need to say something to somebody because you may realize it's the last time you get to see them? And what about those times that you don't? So, but how many people go through that? And it speaks to those people that there are things that you never say that you wish you would have, and it haunts you in life. Why would it not haunt you in death?
Again, I agree. I think we've talked ad nauseum about the scene, so I'm not going to make too much of a point of it other than to say it's also my favorite scene. Just, it unlocks a lot of the movie for me. Frank, what about you?
The one that has stuck with me over the years, over the past 25 years, when she proves just how much she is willing to go to bat for her son. You may have noticed that I tend to gravitate towards the scenes involving the mother and the son, but it was after the birthday party, and she brings him home from the hospital. She locks the door. She puts him into bed. She sees the bruises on his back. Everything about what happens next is perfect. The lighting, the camera placement, the acting, the lack of music, everything about it. She just goes to the phone, she picks it up, and she calls the mother of the friend of, well, not his friend, but the birthday boy. And she says, I want to talk to you about your boy and his friends keeping their goddamn hands off my son. And then we have a dissolve to blackness. And you just say, go, Mama Bear. I love that. That's always been something that has stuck with me over the past 25 years because it makes me think about parents who would do something like that as well as parents who would not.
All right, Dad, favorite scene?
The tape. Maybe it's just me as an old defense attorney, but having the evidence handed to you certainly made me, well, I guess the word isn't smile, but it kind of like the vindication was palpable.
That definitely was a jaw-dropping moment for me in the film, not having remembered that at all. I was flabbergasted that was in there. Favorite scene for you, Frank?
M. Night Shyamalan's cameo as the Doctor for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's actually pretty good. I mean, granted, it's not a role that, he's on screen for probably less than a minute, but it felt like a very Hitchcockian touch to the film. Hitchcock always, making appearances in his films, those little Where's Waldo cameos. So that scene to me also spoke volumes because he's questioning her as a mother. And he says, we have a social worker here who's going to ask you a few procedural questions. And she's looking at him and she's saying to him, are you saying that I'm a bad mother? Are you saying that I hurt my child? It was those little moments that just really add to her character that allowed Toni Collette to bring this character from what very easily could have become just the token mother role or the stock mother role and make her fully fleshed out. I just think it gave her character a chance to breathe and to develop. And without that, I don't think that the ending scene in the car would have had as much impact. because he just would have been talking to the quote-unquote mother role. And yeah, maybe I'm sure he still would have done a great job acting in that scene, but without the two of them working together, they were like a balanced equation. They just had a really great dynamic. And for her to be asked those questions by M. Night Shyamalan, by his doctor character, I mean, those were the questions that really cut into her. They really struck at the core of her being, because her kid was her life.
As far as most indelible, I'll take the obvious and say the twist is the most memorable thing about the movie, given that that's the most memorable thing about the movie for everybody. Any disagreements?
It's not just the twist, but it's the tenderness and the romance of it.
It's still the same scene.
I know, but
okay. So you're disagreeing without disagreeing.
I'm just saying that there's more to the scene than just the twist. But letting go is the most indelible to me too.
Yeah. Frank, any disagreement?
No disagreement.
Yeah.
This was his moment of realization. I'm not saying this is the moment he realizes he's dead. When I say his moment of realization, what I mean is, for him, it's his moment of truth. He has reached closure. He has finished his business on Earth. He has reached out to his wife in the only way that he is capable of while she's sleeping, talking to her, which, by the way, was Cole's suggestion. So I love the fact that they helped each other out. Malcolm saying to Cole, talk to the ghosts. That'll ease the fear. Cole saying to Malcolm, talk to your wife in her sleep. That way she'll really hear you. And that's exactly what he does. So it's closure. Like I said, it's closure for Malcolm. He now can transition into the next phase of existence, whatever that may be. He knows his wife is going to be okay, and she, in her sleep, feels his presence. She knows he's okay. So it's a bittersweet ending, but really, it was as happy of an ending as you could get, given the obvious circumstances.
It's the only thing that everybody talked about for probably 2 to 3 years. It's the number one thing that, The Sixth Sense. Oh yeah, that ending. Yeah, that's the most indelible moment. This is the indelible of indelible moments. So, with that, we'll take our second break and we'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. So far, we have 7 different episodes now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@gmotepodcast, where I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmotepodcast. Both of those are available in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there, and if you do, please like the video or subscribe to the channel. We would really appreciate it. Moving on, Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes, we have one. Erica Ash, 46, American actress and comedian, Survivor's Remorse, and The Real Husbands of Hollywood.
And so we remember her here for her contributions with a moment of silence in her honor. Thank you. Best funniest lines? I really don't have a whole lot of nominees for this. I'll take the obvious first line here with I see dead people. Cole Sear.
They don't have meetings about rainbows. Cole Sear.
Malcolm, I think I can go now. Just needed to do a couple of things. I needed to help someone. I think I did. And I needed to tell you something. You were never second, ever. I love you. You sleep now. Everything will be different in the morning.
My last one. Malcolm, I know what I want. I want to be able to talk to my wife again, the way we used to talk to each other. Like there's no one else in the world except us. I'm assuming you guys still have others?
Malcolm, keep moving, cheese stick.
Cole, she wanted me to tell you she saw you dance. She said when you were little, you and her had a fight right before your dance recital. You thought she didn't come see you dance. She did. She hid in the back so you wouldn't see. She said you were like an angel. She said you came to the place where they buried her. Ask her a question. She said the answer is every day. What did you ask? Lynn, do I make her proud? Wow. Yeah. That chokes me up even now.
I think we need a moment here and maybe a tissue for someone.
Yeah, well, old man's disease. You get more emotional as you get older.
Oh, I told you I cried at this scene, but that was when the movie was happening. So, any other lines?
I'm out.
I'm out.
All right. Yeah, I didn't think it was a particularly quote heavy movie, but all right. Let's go to the Stanley rubric. Up first, we have legacy. This category is trying to signify the 5 years, everything from about the 5-year mark after it was released to now. So this is roughly from 2004 to today. What is the legacy of this movie? And we divide this between those that are recognized in the audience, so the normal people, the casual film fans out here, and then the people that are in the industry, so podcasters, critics, actors, all of us are lumped into the other side of this. Now, as far as legacy, I actually think that the industry has a high regard for this, but if I were to put it on my own rubric scale grading, I have it on kind of the must-watch films of the 90s list for critics that may have changed certain industry practices, promoted a fairly big new director, gave Bruce Willis another big win, made us pretty well familiar with most of the people that were in this movie, but I don't quite have it getting up to like a 5 on the industry side of it because it's not one of the number one grossing films of all time. It was not in the top 10 of most critics' lists, after the fact. It does kind of have still a certain attitude with the industry, but it's not like it's a celebrated classic yet. It could be, but for 25 years, it's not quite at that point. So I have a 4. On the audience side of things, it's hard to say it's anything less than a 5. When we took our anecdotal straw poll of our staff earlier this week, and almost everybody had held up their hand that they knew of this movie, and probably 2/3 of that had seen this movie. It's hard for you not to say that this has seepage into the culture at large, that this was such a big movie that even the line, "I see dead people," has made its way into modern rap lyrics by like Kendrick Lamar has a big song that starts out with "I see dead people." It's still all over the place. People know this movie. So I have a 9 overall.
Do I get points for knowing who Kendrick Lamar is?
Well, you would if you didn't butcher the name there for a second.
Well, I just misspoke.
Okay, so who is Kendrick Lamar?
He's a rapper.
You mean when I said modern rap lyrics and then brought up Kendrick Lamar?
Well, I actually, knew that he existed. So being an old white guy, I should get, street cred for that.
In the same way that the Washington Generals are spotted points, but okay.
Yeah, well, okay.
Anyway, what's your score, Pop?
I agree on the industry. I think it's right spot on. I'm at a 4. Yeah, and I got a little bit different interpretation. Back at about 2003, 2005, this would have probably had about 80 to 90% of people who are familiar with it. So I think it's fading a bit. So I can't go with the full 5 on the public. So I went with a 4.5 for a 9.5 overall.
You would have an 8.5.
Excuse me, 8.5.
We know you didn't do math. That's why you became a lawyer. But all right. Frank, what do you have?
I have to say that I agree with what you just said. I think that the movie is probably, I mean, just going by how my kids know it. My daughter has never seen it, but she knows that it's the movie where Bruce Willis was a ghost the whole time. She knows that it's the movie where some kid says, "I see dead people." So I think the tagline, and I think that twist, that's probably become in the cultural consciousness. I think that's really what's become, that has more of a lasting impact, I should say, than the film itself, which is a shame because it is so well written. I think that any aspiring screenwriter, I think that they would do very well to watch this movie and to study its structure, its beats, its rhythm, and really just its subtlety. I mean, this could have been a full-blown, spook fest, but instead it was very restrained and it was very subtle, which I think made it much more emotional. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I would say that in terms of its legacy, the tagline and the twist, that's what's lasted. That's what's been, as you mentioned earlier, that's what's been parodied. That's what's been spoofed. That's what's been referenced. And I think that's what the film's claim to fame is 25 years later. I'd probably have to go with a 4.5 myself.
Okay, for audience or industry?
Oh, I'm sorry, for audience. For industry, I think that, unfortunately, it's almost as if Shyamalan peaked too soon. Because at first he was doing all right with Signs and Unbreakable, and then with The Village. But as tends to be the case in show business, once someone is built up to be the next big thing, they're always going to, through no fault of their own, they're never going to match expectations. And I think the industry works that way because, as they say in the industry, you're only as big as the box office receipts of your most recent film. So I think he's struggled to make a film that has matched the brilliance of this one. I think that he's been accused by some in the industry of being a one-trick pony because he always has to have that last-minute gotcha at the end. So, and this is not my personal opinion. I'm saying this is how I think, this is how I perceive the industry to regard him. So, I would say with the industry, probably a 3.
We should almost create our own set of Oscars at the time of the Academy Awards, and one of them could be the Orson Welles Overachievement at My First Film Award.
There are plenty of other podcasts that focus on revisiting the Oscars. One of which will be on Sunday.
I'm talking about when we're each Oscar we look for give some of our own odd awards.
Okay, sure. How would you tell that in the moment?
No, we do an Oscar show, don't we?
I know. How would you tell that in the moment?
Okay, I'm not understanding where you're going with this.
You're asking that an Oscar nomination for an award in a particular year is for somebody who peaked too soon, which you're trying to measure in the year that they're actually peaking?
Okay.
Like,
well,
how would you be able to tell? That the peak too soon has to be a hindsight award.
All right.
Anyway. So that's an 8.33 average between the three of us. Impact and significance. I'm sorry, I have no real great argument for a 10 other than it was fucking huge. This came out of nowhere. It was made on a relatively minor budget. It was kind of a first-time director on a spec script who became an overnight sensation. It made stars out of most of the cast and kind of blew up everywhere. Everybody knew it. It was one of the defining movies of this year. It's a 10. Now, Somebody tell me why I'm wrong.
I can't. I agree with that 100%. Everything you said, I cannot counter.
Yeah, I guess it didn't get the big award for actors, but it did get the nominations. It didn't win a whole lot. So for the industry, and it really didn't. It allowed Shyamalan to have more films, but it didn't propel anybody per se. I went with a 4.5 for the industry, but the public was a dead on 5. So I went with a 9.5. I just couldn't give it a full 10.
I'm sorry, if I'm going to make a true industry argument, the notion of a horror film getting into the Oscars for Best Picture before they expanded it to 10, and that this was like one of the more celebrated things of the year. The only other time I've seen that in my lifetime is when Get Out came out. But all right, I'll leave you at a 9.5.
But I'm sticking by my assessment. I thought about it a lot.
And again, for the audience out there, I should have mentioned this on the front end. This is measuring those initial 5 years. So when you want to talk about the DVD sales and the industry receipts and the video rentals and all of the other stuff where this movie made big, big money, I would say that that's a part of it. And it has been a part of my co-host's arguments in other movies, such as Shawshank before. But we digress. So that is a 9.83 average between the three of us. Now you may continue with Novelty, Dad.
Novelty. All right. Story versus execution. I think the execution with the plot twists and how the structure of the film was and how it was shot and the quality associated with it, I would give it a 5. But ultimately, it's a ghost story. And it's people communicating or talking with ghosts. It was wrapped, and that's where the execution comes in a very unique and special way. But the underlying story itself was not that novel. So I gave it a 3. So I have an 8 overall.
So I've divided Novelty recently between originality and execution, which you were kind of alluding to there. I don't agree with you at all that the originality suffers in the way that you're indicating. I think this is a wholly original story, which is why I think it resonated so much with the public. So I have a full 5 on originality. Where I think this movie suffers is actually, I dinged it a couple of points for execution, and that's only for maybe a lack of budget, maybe a little working with some people who aren't like the full-time industry professionals. Disney didn't put its full force into this movie. It was kind of like, yeah, we'll take a chance on a project. We'll do something. We'll throw Bruce Willis in it because he owes us one. There are a couple of things in here from a special effects or maybe a lack of certain subtle cues in certain spots. Again, there were a few small areas where I had some issues with some of the cinematography for moving the camera a little bit too much for my taste, just personally, that I would argue against. So I came down at a 3.5 because I reserved the 5 on execution for things that I think excel on execution, as opposed to, something that where I think it's crisp, but it's maybe not like an excelling thing. This, I think, is just slightly below that, so I have it at 3.5. I have an 8.5 overall.
For Novelty, originality, a creative concept, I do have to admit that I give it a 5. In terms of execution, as much as I hate to say it, there are a couple of plot holes. If I have to pick at nits, there's a moment when the film sort of breaks its own rules. I can think of 2 examples. The first is when she's looking at the photographs of herself with Cole that are hung up on the wall, and she sees the little flashes of light in the photos, which, I don't know, that was sort of a strain of credibility. She never noticed that before. It's almost as if I think it would have played better if she had just gotten a roll of film back from Photomat and she's looking at brand new prints for the first time. Maybe that would have worked better in terms of being more credible. I also thought that the beginning, when all of the kitchen cabinets and drawers are opened, that to me, I specifically remember when I first saw the film, thinking to myself, Poltergeist did this 17 years ago, because she walks into the kitchen and there are all the chairs all over the place. So I didn't see that as... My initial reaction was, oh God, is this movie going to not live up to the hype? Then it kicked right in. But I would say that those... I mean, like I said, I have to nitpick to find something to use your word, which I love, to ding the movie for. Probably the only other one where it seems to break its own rule is when he's getting ready to play King Arthur, and the teacher comes in and says, "Are you ready? You know, it's your call." And there's a woman sitting across from Cole, and she says, "Oh, good luck." She says, "You have enough makeup on." She gets up, she turns around. It's obvious that she's a ghost. She's a burn victim. 2 seconds later, the teacher is saying to Cole, "You know, the whole theater burned down when I was in school here and they rebuilt it." Cole says, "Yeah, I know." She looks content. She looks happy. So why did she not cross over? Why is she still in this limbo state? Because the movie establishes that once your business is finished, then you move on. That's what happened with Kira. That's what happens with Malcolm at the end. But this woman, what exactly is she waiting for? So that I thought was a bit clunky. So if I have to go with execution, I would probably have to bring it down to a 3.5.
Okay, so you also have an 8.5. So that is a 8.33 average between the three of us, same as Legacy. Classicness. Dad, it is your category. Take it away.
There just wasn't anything that was missing in this, really. And the only reason I give it a little bit down, I understand this is a minority directed project, but there really wasn't that many minority actors in it. I can understand why Disney kind of did it. I think it's a little unfortunate they felt they had to, but a working class neighborhood in Philadelphia and there are no minorities seemed a little odd to me. So, but as far as the characters and true portrayals of working class people in Philadelphia and working class people in general and their plights and difficulties and circumstances they face, it made a lot of sense. There really wasn't anything that I would go, mark it down too much. So my normal starting point is a 7. I went up to an 8 simply because of that, but I can't go beyond that just because of the the lack of color within the cast.
So, for full disclosure, and again, to define the category a little bit for the audience, this is usually a measurement of what has aged or not aged particularly well. There are obviously movies that are classic that have some issues with them after the fact due to either the makeup of the cast or, any number of things. But also with special effects has a bearing on this category. We've had issues with comedy where the jokes don't hold up or are more offensive. I would say that not having seen this movie in a long time, it still feels relevant to me, partly because I would say that I haven't returned to it as often. I still think that the jump scares for the most part work, at least given that I don't watch this particularly very often. It's been 11 or 12 years since I've seen it. The only thing that really ages poorly is the fact that everybody knows the ending. And so if you're watching it either for the first time or you're watching it for the second time, there's just a little bit of freshness that's taken away from you than knowing what happened at the end of the movie for the first time. I have no idea what it would have been like to see this movie without knowing the ending. That was taken away from me. So I guess the only way that, to me, this doesn't hold up is just from that aspect. That being said, I do think there is a classicness to this movie. It's kind of getting into that era where 20 to 25 years out, this is a decently classic movie that could be shown on TCM or AMC or any of these other movie channels especially now that we're getting back into streaming services having specific channels. This could be on an M. Night Shyamalan channel devoted on Tubi, or when Netflix eventually goes to their own channels or whatever it is. So I don't think that this is to the point of being like certain films from the 70s. It's not Jaws, it's not The Godfather, it's not, I don't even think it's quite The Matrix for as much as cultural relevance as that has. But I do think it has at least a point for that. So the point I take away for the ending kind of being ruined for everybody, I give back up in overall classicness of the film. I have a fence-sitting 7.
I would probably have to give it a 7.5. Keeping the math simple. But
I thank you for that.
Both of you raised excellent points. And it was something that crossed my mind, was the fact that this was supposed to be working class Philadelphia, and there was one black student in Cole's class, no lines, who is visible really only when during the Kangatha play they all fall and they're all laughing and the kids are all over each other. And there was only, well, there were two characters of color in Bruce Willis's wife's antique store, and the woman was depicted really as a very materialistic, shallow, unpleasant jewelry grubber. And the man, her fiance, was depicted as someone who did not have the spine to say to her, where are your priorities? This might not work if this is what you're basing, if you're measuring my love by how big of a rock I can give you on your finger. So they were both depicted in a negative light. So that I would say, and again, I don't know if that was Shyamalan's choice. I don't know if that was something that was just a sign of the times. But something tells me that it would not be, or at least the minor characters would not be cast the same way these days. So 7.5 for me.
All right, so that is a 7.5 average. Finally, rewatchability. I'll make mine fairly simple. If I were to watch this every few years or so, or this is something that I would be willing to every few years or so, which I would say that that's about right. I give that about a 3 for putting it on. For leaving it on in my rewatchability score, if I stumble across it, it's on one of these channels or anything as we kind of have in streaming, I might be tempted to turn it on for 5 minutes, maybe watch a few scenes. So that's somewhere about 2.5 for me. So I have about a 5.5.
The rewatchability factor of this film for me is not due to the story. I mean, how many times can you keep watching the same twist ending knowing that it's coming? But there is rewatchability for the technique, the storytelling technique. Like I said earlier, if you want a good lesson in how to write a suspenseful story that makes you empathize with the characters, that shows intelligence, that treats the subject matter with dignity and does not cheapen it as just a way to scare the audience for the sake of scaring them. For me, that is a lot of rewatchability. It's sort of like a reassurance that movies like that can still be written and still be made. I would go with the 9 because, again, because of the technique. There's a lot to be gained from studying the movie's technique.
I usually start with a 6, kind of, as to whether it's something that I will rewatch on a regular basis. And realistically, I'm surprised I haven't seen it. I really enjoyed the film. Again, there are certain holes in my movie watching portfolio, but this being one of them. And I will rewatch it again within the next couple of years. So that gets it up another half point to a point. And I will, or would be willing to show it to people who have never seen the film. This is something I might sit down and try to get your mother to watch, because I think she would enjoy the story. So I'm going to give it a 7 for rewatchability.
So that's a 7.17 average between the three of us. For audience score, we have an 89% for Google users and a 90% for Rotten Tomato users. So, to recap the categories, we had an 8.33 for legacy, a 9.83 for impact and significance, an 8.33 for novelty, a 7.5 for classicness, and a 7.17 for rewatchability, with a 8.95 for audience score, giving us a final total of 50.11, and currently placing it on our list between Get Out at number 53 and Singing in the Rain at number 54. So it will take over the number 54 slot. If you, of course, disagree with any of our scoring, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or any of our socials at GMotePodcast on Letterboxd, X, TikTok, or YouTube, or at our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMotePodcast. Let's move to remaining questions. We do not have any listener questions this week, but first off, how is Malcolm able to communicate with Anna in her sleep? We don't actually get like a true explanation for the universe as to what the rules are between ghosts and the regular world.
I'll delve into the quagmire. Okay. In physics, there is what's called string theory. And string theory is that energy does not dissipate. And so there's actually a subgenre of string theory that this whole concept of your thoughts are emanated through your brain out into the ether, out into the world. And so, why is it that you think about, boy, I haven't heard from Joe in a long time, and then suddenly Joe calls you? It's because of that. And so the subconscious specifically has a broader ability to understand and perceive than the conscious does, because it can focus on specifics as opposed to the various influences that exist in our conscious thought. And so it makes sense that it would come through as a dream, that's your subconscious communication through this whole ability to communicate without actual visual, physical communication.
And you get on me about bringing up philosophy during our podcast. At least thrice this year
Okay.
you have done so. And you bring in string theory as your opening salvo to answer a remaining question. Okay.
Okay, well, maybe
I'm not
just
saying
a
the
deep
answer
thinker.
doesn't make sense or whatever else, but just makes me wonder. Just makes me wonder.
Well,
Anywho.
the thought came to me while I was sitting with a bowl of peyote.
Okay, you want to pass the peace pipe here? Okay, what was more shocking? The reveal that Crowe was actually dead, or that Kira's mom poisoned her? Now, us knowing the ending, I think for the two of us, it's probably the former as opposed to the latter, but to our guest who was actually in the theater and saw it fresh for the first time, what was the more shocking element?
Most definitely the fact that he was dead the whole time.
Okay.
I just remember my jaw dropping to the ground.
There are certain moments in time where I really do wish I could have seen it for the first time with an audience, like when it came out. Certain films like that, and certain moments in certain films. That's one of them. The shark coming up out of the water in Jaws, that's another one. Watching Dorothy go through the door to the Land of Oz for the first time. That would have been an amazing thing to see in a theater with people. But
yeah.
All right. Finally, is this the most indelible film twist ever? I have kind of spiked the lens a little bit already by saying I don't think so. I think it is Darth Vader revealing he is Luke Skywalker's father, but that's just me.
Well, I had the same experience with Empire Strikes Back that you did with Sixth Sense. Empire Strikes Back, I saw as a really little kid in the theater, not knowing what the heck was going on, because all I knew about this movie was the Star Wars storybook for kids that I had read. So I didn't understand I didn't get that moment. I saw it after the fact. So I can't peg that as, for me personally, a big, oh my lord moment. So would I say that this one is the number one? I would say that it's up there, to be honest, but I'm having a difficult time trying to think of any other example beyond Empire Strikes Back or another M. Night Shyamalan film.
The Usual Suspects is one that comes up a lot.
True, yeah.
The only
that one didn't shock me as much, though.
The only other one that I had that I remembered where it was a huge twist is it was rumored that there was this twist, but The Crying Game. Where
yes.
It wasn't as big a film, but the fact is you're watching this and all of a sudden you come to the conclusion or realization that Jay Davidson is a guy, and you had no clue through the film watching this, and you're like, oh, okay. So yes.
Spoilers much?
What is it? A 25-year-old film?
It's like 30.
Yeah. Okay. If you haven't figured it out by now, too bad.
Okay. Well, I do want to thank our guest for being on with us, and welcome back anytime. But Frank, just take a second here to remind people, where can they find you and what do you got going on in your world?
First of all, thank you for having me on. This has been great. And I want you both on my show whenever time is convenient for you. So my podcast, my solo podcast, is Silver Screeners. You can find it on all the major podcasting platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Good Pods, all the usual places. My spin-off podcast, as we call it, my co-host and I, we each have our own individual projects, so we call this sort of a joint spin-off, Movies Across the Pod. Again, you'll find that on Spotify and the other places. And you can follow me on social media. I have a public Facebook film group called Silver Screeners. I'm on Instagram and Threads at Frank Mandosa 1974, and you can also follow me on Twitter /X at Filmbuff 1974.
Well, excellent. Dad, before we sign out, any remaining thoughts for the week?
No, we're guesting on a show next week, or that we're recording next weekend, so it has dominated my movie watching experience. I have lived in the year 1942. I think I finished my 14th film for 1942 this afternoon. And I have a 15th that I'm an hour or about half an hour or 40 minutes from finishing. And I have one more that was a Best Picture nominee that I have yet to see. And one that I have seen multiple times, but I need to rewatch, which is Pride of the Yankees with Gary Cooper. So yeah, that's been the elephant in the room. I haven't had a chance to watch anything new. I haven't gotten out to the theaters. I haven't done anything else. It's been watching these films, and I'm enjoying most of them. I mean, I can't say that any of the films that I watched, I go, this is, really bad.
They're like 3 out of 5 star for most of them.
Okay, maybe. There were a couple that were really good, that I really were surprised at how good they were.
But I get you, and now you understand how it feels when for the last 2 performances I had on that particular program, from 2005, I think I did 47 movies, and for 2014, last month, I did 53. So this is a light month that we're going to be doing 20. We're finding it difficult to even get to all of these. Now, part of that is the availability of 1942 films is not high, even on like Tubi and all of these other places that are looking for movies that are just readily available. But that being said, since you made fun of me for this last week, I am in the process. I have about 20 minutes left on one film. I will be up to 11 by the end of the evening. That is my plan to finish out my evening after we're done recording here, is to do that. But I will be taking most of the weekend to try and watch the other 8 to 9 films that I feel are must watch before we record the episode on Sunday night.
I could not find, but I did find, actually, Wake Island.
Okay.
Where William Bendix was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for that film. It took a bit, but I was able to find it online because it's in the public domain.
Well, good to know. But otherwise, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. Doctor, those that tell don't know, and those that know won't tell. Next week for our 223rd episode, we welcome back celebrity guest Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac podcast and our newest celebrity guest, Sean Phillip of Math Teacher Movies, to rediscuss one of the most controversial Oscar exclusions of all time, Do the Right Thing, from 1989. Written and directed by Spike Lee, music by Bill Lee, starring Spike Lee, Rosie Perez, Danny Aiello, Ossie Davis, Giancarlo Esposito, and John Turturro. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.